The morning Zara noticed things that did not add up. She was sitting on an overturned milk crate behind the service entrance of the Harrington Grand Hotel, eating half a peanut butter sandwich her mother had wrapped in a paper towel and tucked into her coat pocket before the sun came up. She was 9 years old. She had her mother's eyes, the kind that moved before the rest of her face did, taking in everything around her before deciding what to say about any of it. Her braids were fresh, done the night before by her grandmother, who had pulled each section tight enough that Zara had pressed her lips together and said nothing because she understood that tight braids meant her grandmother loved her and was trying to make her look like somebody who was taken care of. She did look like somebody who was taken care of. She also looked like a child who had been awake since 4:30 in the morning. Her mother, Camille, had not wanted to bring her. She had said so 3 times on the bus ride over, not in anger, but in the particular voice she used when she was worried and trying not to show it. "You should be home with Grandma," Camille had said, staring at the foggy window as the city moved past. "It's Saturday. Grandma has her church meeting," Zara had said. "I know she does. And the church meeting goes until noon." "I know that too. And you said you'd be back by 10, but last time you said that you didn't get home until almost 2, so?" Camille had exhaled slowly through her nose, the way she did when Zara was right about something and she was deciding whether to admit it. Then she had shifted the zipper bag on her lap and said, "You sit where I put you. You don't talk to anybody unless they talk to you first. You don't go near the kitchen, you don't go near the event floor, and you especially don't go near the stairs up to the mezzanine because the last thing I need tonight is my child falling down a marble staircase in a hotel that charges $400 a night for a room smaller than our living room." Zara had nodded 4 times, once per instruction. "And you eat what I bring you," Camille added. "You don't touch the food from the carts, even if they're throwing it away." Camille had looked at her then, really looked at her, and something behind her eyes had shifted the way it sometimes did, as if she was seeing something she hadn't expected. "Yes," she had said quietly. Even then, now Zara sat on the milk crate with her peanut butter sandwich and watched the service entrance the way she watched most things, which was carefully and without making it obvious that she was watching at all. The Harrington Grand stood in the corner of 5th and Meridian, a building made of pale stone and dark glass that caught the early morning light and held it the way expensive things always seem to hold light, as if they had paid for the privilege. Camille worked for a catering company called Prestige Events and Service, which was a name Zara had decided that sounded like what it wanted to be rather than what it was. Prestige Events and Service had a loading dock on the south side of the hotel where delivery trucks came and went starting at 5 in the morning when the city was still gray and quiet, and the pigeons were the only witnesses. Camille was inside now, wearing the black uniform with the small gold pin on the lapel that meant she was serving, which meant she would be on her feet for the next 6 hours, carrying trays of food to people who would not remember her name. Zara had been watching the loading dock for 45 minutes. In that time, she had seen 3 produce trucks, a florist van, 2 men carrying what appeared to be an entire chandelier in separate pieces, and 1 woman in a very long coat who had walked past the service entrance twice without stopping, looking both ways each time as though she was waiting for someone and did not want to appear to be waiting for someone. Zara had filed all of this away. She filed most things away. Her 3rd-grade teacher, Mrs. Okafor, had once told her mother at a parent conference that Zara processed the world like a camera that never stopped recording. Camille had laughed a small, tired laugh and said, "That's one way to put it." What Mrs. Okafor hadn't said, but what Camille already knew, was that this quality in Zara was both a gift and a worry, because a child who notices everything also notices the things adults would prefer she didn't. The morning moved the way Saturday mornings at service entrances moved, which was quickly and without ceremony. At 6:45, a black car with tinted windows pulled up to the side street adjacent to the loading dock. Not to the loading dock itself, but close enough that Zara could see it from her crate. It was the kind of car that had no visible manufacturer's logo on the back, which Zara had learned meant it was very expensive, because very expensive things often didn't feel the need to announce themselves. A man got out of the passenger side. He was tall and thin-featured, wearing a charcoal suit that was pressed precisely enough that Zara found herself wondering if he had slept in it that way. He had silver at his temples and a phone already in his hand, and he moved the way people move when they believe they were the most important person in any given space. Not rudely, exactly, but with a kind of absolute certainty about which direction things should move in, and that direction was always toward him. He stopped near the corner of the building and spoke into the phone, his voice low, his back angled slightly away from the street. Zara watched him. She ate the second half of her peanut butter sandwich. The man spoke for approximately 3 minutes. She couldn't hear the words from where she sat, but she watched the shape of the conversation. The way his free hand moved once in a sharp, cutting gesture, the way he paused and listened for a long moment without expression, the way he finally said something that ended with the kind of nod people use when they are confirming something that has already been decided. Then he turned slightly, and for just a moment, he was facing the loading dock area, and Zara could see his face clearly. She had seen that face before. She held the paper towel with her sandwich in both hands and did not move. Her mind did the thing it sometimes did, the thing her grandmother called that girl going into her library, which was the way she searched through everything she had stored until she found the right shelf, the right page, the right moment. She had seen this man 6 weeks ago. The memory came back in pieces, the way memories did when they've been stored in a hurry. 6 weeks ago, on a Tuesday afternoon, she had been sitting in the back office of the catering company's staging kitchen while Camille and the rest of the crew had done prep work for a corporate luncheon. Zara had been doing homework at a folding table in the corner, her notebook open in front of her, her pencil moving. The staging kitchen had a small window that looked out onto the alley, and at one point a black car had pulled up and 2 men had gotten out and stood near the open trunk of the car. She hadn't paid full attention. She was doing long division, and long division required most of a person. But she had looked up twice. And the second time she had looked up, she had seen the man she now recognized as the man in the charcoal suit pass something to the second man, a shorter man with a red tie, in a way that was quiet and quick and deliberate. Not like handing someone a gift, like completing a transaction that had been agreed upon in advance and needed no conversation to accompany it. At the time, she had looked back down at her notebook and finished her long division. Now she looked at the man in the charcoal suit standing outside the Harrington Grand and felt the particular feeling she sometimes felt when two pieces of information connected in ways that hadn't been clear before. It was not alarm exactly. It was more like the feeling of hearing a sound in another room and understanding that the sound was important even before you knew what it meant. She folded her paper towel carefully and put it in the pocket of her coat. The man in the charcoal suit put his phone away and walked into the hotel through a side entrance that was separate from the service door. Zara sat on her crate and thought. Underscore. The event that evening was called the Reeves Foundation Annual Partnership Gala, a name Zara knew because she had read it on the gold-lettered sign that the hotel staff had propped up near the main entrance before she had been redirected to the service area. She had read it twice because the word partnership had struck her as interesting. Her mother had told her, on a different occasion, that partnership was one of those words that could mean many things depending on who was using it, which was also how Zara thought about the word honest. Marcus Reeves was not yet at the hotel when Zara arrived. She knew this the way she knew most things about the evening, which was by listening carefully to conversations that were not directed at her while appearing to be focused on other things, in this case a chapter book she had read 3 times already and was pretending to read a 4th. What she gathered, in the particular way she gathered information, not by asking questions but by being very quiet in the presence of people who had forgotten she was there, was that Marcus Reeves was arriving at 7 o'clock, that he was attending the gala not just as the foundation's creator, but as its primary speaker, and that his chief financial advisor, a man named Derek Holt, had arrived early to handle what one of the kitchen supervisors called the setup business. The kitchen supervisor had said this with a slight tone that Zara recognized as the tone adults used when they meant something more specific than the words they were saying. Derek Holt. Zara added the name to the shelf where she had stored the face. At 5 minutes to 7, Camille appeared at the service entrance door and looked directly at Zara with the expression that meant she was checking, that the check was a form of love, and that the love was tired but undiminished. "You okay?" "Yes." "You eat the sandwich." "Both halves?" Zara considered mentioning that she was 9 years old and capable of eating a complete sandwich without supervision, then decided this was not the moment. "Yes." Camille looked at her for another second, as though she was searching for something behind Zara's eyes and wasn't sure whether she was finding it or not. "I'll bring you something else in about an hour. There's leftover mushroom crostini they're not putting out." "I'll bring you two." "I don't like mushrooms." "I know. I'll bring you the bread parts." "Okay." Camille started to turn back inside, then paused. "Zara." "Yes." "You look like you're thinking about something." Zara looked up at her mother's face. At the exhaustion and the sharpness and the particular quality of attention Camille had always paid to her daughter, the quality that had sometimes felt like surveillance and had gradually revealed itself as love. "I'm always thinking about something. You know what I mean?" She did know. Her mother was asking if the thing she was thinking about was the kind of thing Zara should keep to herself or the kind of thing she should say out loud. This was the question that lived between them most of the time, unspoken. Zara knew things. Her mother knew she knew things. And there was an ongoing negotiation, never finished, never quite articulated, about which things were safe to say and which things would only make Camille more tired than she already was. "I'm fine," Zara said. Camille held her gaze for one more second. Then she went back inside. Zara returned to her chapter book and did not read a single word of it. Underscore. Marcus Reeves arrived at 7:02 in a gray sedan rather than a limousine, which was the first thing Zara noticed about him when she caught a glimpse through the propped-open service door. She had moved closer to the door after Camille went back in, not inside, but close enough to see through the gap between the door and the frame, the gap being approximately 4 inches wide and offering a narrow diagonal view of part of the lobby. She had not planned to look. She had simply moved the crate slightly to stay out of the wind, and the view had appeared. The lobby of the Harrington Grand was high-ceilinged and lit in the warm amber way of spaces that did not want you to think about their electricity bills. From her narrow angle, Zara could see part of the check-in desk, 2 of the large potted plants that flanked the entrance to the mezzanine stairs, and a slice of the reception area where hotel staff stood waiting for the evening's guests to arrive. Marcus Reeves was not what she had expected. She was not sure what she had expected, exactly. The man whose name was on the sign outside. Somebody who filled a room differently than other people. Somebody whose presence required announcement. But the man who walked through the lobby at 7:02 was carrying his own jacket, folded over one arm, and he walked like a man who was tired in a way he had decided not to show but hadn't entirely succeeded in hiding. He was not young, late 50s, perhaps, with the kind of face that might have been sharp and angular once and had settled into something quieter and more considered. He shook hands with the hotel manager with a brevity that suggested he had shaken a great many hands and had learned to do it honestly rather than theatrically. He looked around the lobby once, and in the looking Zara saw something that surprised her. He looked the way her grandmother sometimes looked in church, not at the altar, but at the ceiling, as if he was measuring something between himself and a question he hadn't answered yet. Then Derek Holt appeared. He came from the direction of the mezzanine stairs, moving with the kind of purposeful ease that filled corridors and announced itself without announcing itself. He was smiling, a smile that was ready-made and already deployed before he reached the man he was walking toward. And when he reached Marcus Reeves, he clasped one hand on Reeves's shoulder in the way people did when they wanted to suggest not just warmth but ownership. Zara watched his hands. She had learned to watch people's hands before their faces. Faces could be arranged. Hands were harder to manage. Derek Holt's hands moved with the practiced ease of a man who had long ago stopped noticing that he was managing every gesture. The shoulder clasp, the brief, confident handshake that suggested he had done this enough times to have made the decision about who was leading the greeting before he arrived. The way he turned slightly, placing himself between Reeves and the hotel manager, not rudely, just present, occupying space. Reeves said something. Holt laughed, a laugh that was warm and complete and had no hesitation in it. And then he said something back, and the conversation moved forward, and 3 hotel staff members adjusted their positions accordingly, and no one in the lobby, except for a 9-year-old girl watching through a 4-inch gap, appeared to notice any of this. Zara sat back on her crate and stared at the service door for a long moment after it swung partially closed again. She was still sitting there when Camille brought her 2 pieces of bread from the mushroom crostini that the kitchen wasn't putting out. "You sure you're fine?" Camille said, handing her the bread. "What does Mr. Reeves's advisor look like?" Zara asked. Camille paused in the act of adjusting her service pin. "What? His advisor? What does he look like? Why would I know what his advisor looks like? You've been serving him water for the last 20 minutes. Camille's eyes narrowed. "How do you know that?" Zara held her gaze and said nothing. Her mother exhaled once, the sound landing somewhere between exasperation and acceptance. "Tall, silver at his temples, expensive suit. Does anyone know his name?" "Why are you asking me about this?" "Because I think I saw him before," Zara said. "Somewhere I don't think he's supposed to have been." The service entrance door swung slightly in the wind, and the amber light of the lobby came and went in the gap. Camille stood very still for exactly 4 seconds, which was 4 seconds longer than she usually stood still, which told Zara that her mother was deciding something. "Zara." Her voice was careful, not dismissive. Something else. The tone she used when she was trying to protect her daughter from something she hadn't yet figured out the shape of. "Whatever you think you saw, I know what I saw," Zara said quietly. "You're 9. I know. You're 9 and we are at a client event and your mother's job. I know, Mama." The word Mama landed in the service entrance the way it always landed when Zara used it instead of Mom, which was that it made Camille stop whatever she was doing and look at her daughter the way she had looked at her the first time in the hospital, without distance, without management, just looking. "I'll tell you later," Zara said. "When you get home. I just wanted you to know that there's something I need to tell you." Camille looked at her for another long moment. The hotel was filling with sound now, voices and music, and the particular hum of a large formal event beginning to gather itself. And somewhere in the building Marcus Reeves was preparing to spend an evening being appreciated by people who needed things from him. "Eat your bread," Camille finally said. "Okay, don't go anywhere." "I know." Camille went back inside. Underscore, 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 underscore. If you're already leaning forward, hit that like button and subscribe to Bound Hearts. And drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. She didn't hesitate for a second. Let's see if you can stay with her all the way to the end. Underscore, 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 Zara ate her bread. She thought about what she had seen 6 weeks ago in the alley behind the catering company's staging kitchen. She thought about it the way she thought about math problems, going back to the beginning and working through the steps again rather than jumping to an answer. Step 1, a black car in the alley. Step 2, 2 men. Step 3, the transfer. Something passed from one hand to another. Small, flat, the size of an envelope or a folder. The kind of size that meant documents rather than objects. Step 4, the way they'd stood. Specifically the way the second man, the shorter one with the red tie, had stood, slightly turned away from the building, slightly protective of the transaction, as if he understood that the walls of the staging kitchen had windows. Step 5, the man she now knew as Derek Holt, walking away from the transaction without looking back, because people who were comfortable with what they had just done didn't look back. Looking back was for people who were unsure. Derek Holt had not been unsure. She had stored all of this without understanding why it mattered. The way she sometimes stored things that felt important before she knew what they were important for. Her grandmother called this being gifted with an eye. Her mother called it that girl seeing too much for her own good. Zara just called it what happened when you were quiet enough and patient enough to let things settle into their right shape. The right shape was still settling. She didn't have all of it yet, but she had enough. Underscore. At 8:23, she heard Marcus Reeves's voice for the first time. She heard it because the service entrance propped itself open again, this time held by a rubber stopper that one of the junior catering staff had placed there to make cart access easier. And through the wider gap, Zara could now see not just the lobby, but the edge of the mezzanine level above it, where the gala's main event space was located. The sound system was good, rich and clear, the kind that hotel event spaces paid for, so that voices reached every corner without effort. 8 years ago, Marcus Reeves was saying, this foundation was a conversation I was having with myself at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep and I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that I had built something significant and I had no idea anymore what it was for. Zara did not move from her crate. That's not a comfortable admission, he continued, and there was something in his voice she recognized as unscripted, the slight roughness of words that haven't been rehearsed into smoothness. I'd spent 30 years building the kind of financial architecture that most people in this room understand. You know the language. Return on investment, asset protection, long-term strategic positioning. A brief pause, and I was very good at it. Another pause, longer. The thing about being very good at something is that it fills up all the rooms in your life. There's no space left for the question that eventually comes for all of us, which is, what is this in service of? His voice was quiet now, the quietness of a man who was not performing this admission, but living inside it in real time. 8 years ago, that question came for me. And because I had the particular fortune of knowing what questions I was bad at answering, I gathered people around me who I trusted to help me figure it out. The catering assistant came back for a cart and knocked the rubber stopper out of position, and the door swung mostly closed again, and Zara could only hear the murmur of the crowd's response rather than any more words. She sat on her crate. She thought about the phrase, gathered people around me. She thought about what trust meant to the person giving it, and what it meant to the person receiving it. And the difference between those two things, when the person receiving it had decided to exploit it. At 8:45, she heard the sound of applause from the mezzanine, the warm, full sound of a room full of people who felt they had received something worth receiving. At 9:08, she heard footsteps in the service corridor. She had moved her crate to a spot near the interior service entrance by this point, the one that connected to the hallway running along the ground floor of the hotel, because the wind had come up and the outdoor staging area had gotten cold. She was technically inside, which Camille had not authorized, but she was in a corridor rather than a kitchen or an event floor, which she had decided was a distinction her mother would accept in hindsight if pressed. The footsteps were not catering staff. She knew catering staff footsteps by now, purposeful, rhythmic, the particular percussion of people carrying things at pace. These footsteps were slower and had the irregular quality of a conversation, two people walking and talking, not going anywhere in a hurry because they didn't need to. She heard Derek Holt's voice before she saw him. In a month, the transfers are already structured. By the time the quarterly audit closes, it'll look like operational dispersal. She did not look up from her book. The footsteps came closer and then moved past, the voices dropping as they passed the corridor junction. And then she heard a second voice, the shorter man with the red tie, she thought, though she couldn't be certain. The second voice said something that contained the words exposure window and the board meeting. And then Derek Holt said, clearly and without lowering his voice, he won't look. He never looks. That's why this works. The footsteps moved away. Zara sat very still. She was 9 years old, and she was not certain she fully understood everything she had just heard, but she understood enough. She understood the particular shape of the confidence in Derek Holt's voice when he said he won't look. She understood that the he in that sentence was the same man who had stood in his lobby with his jacket over his arm, looking at the ceiling like a man searching for the answer to a question. She also understood that she was going to have to say something, and that saying something was going to be complicated in ways she had not yet mapped out, and that nobody was going to immediately believe a 9-year-old girl who had overheard a conversation in a service corridor. especially not when the 9-year-old's mother worked catering and the man she was accusing wore charcoal suits and had silver at his temples and moved through lobbies like he owned the geometry of them. She closed her chapter book. She stood up from her milk crate. She walked to the nearest catering staff member, a young woman named Priya, whose name tag she had memorized during the first hour, and said, "Can you please tell me when Mr. Reeves is going to take a break?" Priya looked down at her with the mild surprise adults always showed when Zara spoke, as if they had not quite calibrated their expectations for the specific vocabulary she used. "What?" "The man speaking upstairs. The gala host. What does he break?" "He's in his keynote. So probably," Priya checked her watch, "maybe 40 minutes?" "Thank you," Zara said, and returned her crate. Underscore. Underscore. 41 minutes later, she heard the applause again. She stood up from her crate for the last time and walked to the interior service entrance and threw it into the corridor and down the corridor toward the place where the service hallway met the main lobby corridor, a junction she had mapped in her head during the course of the evening. She stopped at the junction, which was just around the corner from the lobby, and she waited. She heard voices. She heard footsteps. She heard Derek Holt say, with the warmth and precision of a man who had practiced it, "Beautiful speech, Marcus. Really, exactly the right tone." And then she heard Marcus Reeves say, with the tired honesty of a man who meant it, "I just told the truth." "That's why it worked," Holt said. The footsteps were close now, coming toward the lobby from the mezzanine stairs direction. Zara did not step out. She waited one more second, counting to herself the way her grandmother had taught her. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,003. Then she stepped into the corridor junction and stood there and waited for them to turn the corner. Marcus Reeves came around the corner first because he was walking slightly ahead, and he almost walked into her because a 9-year-old girl standing still in a hotel corridor at 9:52 at night is not something the peripheral vision of a man who has just given a keynote address is fully calibrated for. He pulled up short, looked down, and the frown of surprise he'd been forming softened into something different as he took in the face looking back up at him. "Oh," he said. "Hello." "Hello," said Zara. Behind him, Derek Holt came around the corner and stopped. Zara looked at Marcus Reeves for exactly 1 second. Then she turned and looked directly at Derek Holt. And she said, clearly and without hesitation, the way she said everything, not raising her voice, not performing the words, just stating them the way she would state any true thing. "He's the one who's stealing from you." The corridor went very, very quiet. Marcus Reeves looked at the girl in front of him. He looked at the braids and the old coat and the chapter book held under one arm and the stillness in her face. He looked at her the way adults look at children when they're trying to decide if what they are hearing is a child's misunderstanding or a child's truth. He did not look at Derek Holt. Not yet. That was the first thing Zara noticed, and she stored it carefully. Derek Holt made a sound. A short, light sound. Almost a laugh. The sound of a man reaching for the tone that dismisses things without appearing to take them seriously, and said, "Whose child is this?" Zara did not look at him when he said this. She kept her eyes on Marcus Reeves, because she had learned, in the particular school of watching and storing and waiting, that the most important moment in any situation like this was not the moment of the accusation. The most important moment was the moment right after, when the person you were speaking to decided whether to believe you or to reach for the easier story. The story where everything was fine and a little girl was confused and the carpet of the Harrington Grand was still plush and untroubled beneath expensive shoes. She watched Marcus Reeves make that decision in real time. She watched his face go through 3 things in the space of approximately 4 seconds. The first was surprise. The second was the beginning of dismissal. The third was something else. The third was the flicker of a man who had built his fortune on the ability to recognize patterns and who had, in the back of some room in his mind that he never showed anyone, been aware of a sound he hadn't been able to name for longer than he had admitted to himself. He did not look at Derek Holt, but he didn't reach for dismissal either. Instead, Marcus Reeves crouched down in the corridor of the Harrington Grand in his very good suit, until he was at eye level with a 9-year-old girl whose braids were tight and whose coat was old and who had been sitting on an overturned milk crate for most of the evening because her mother had nowhere else to put her. And he said, in a voice that was quiet and careful and utterly serious, "What's your name?" "Zara," she said. "Zara." He looked at her for a moment. "Why do you say that?" "Because I heard him," she said. "Tonight. And I saw him. 6 weeks ago. Behind my mother's work." Marcus Reeves was very still. "The man with the red tie," Zara said. "Do you know who I mean?" Something passed across Marcus Reeves's face, fast, controlled, but not fast enough. He knew. He knew exactly who she meant. And in the corridor behind him, Derek Holt, who had built his entire professional life on the ability to know which rooms were safe and which were dangerous, had just understood that this particular room had stopped being safe, and that the reason it had stopped being safe was a 9-year-old girl who had been sitting on a milk crate in the service entrance for the last 4 hours, watching. "Zara," Marcus Reeves said, and his voice was the steadiest thing in the hallway. "Would you tell me more?" The corridor was the kind of quiet that happens when a space has been holding its breath. Marcus Reeves had not stood back up. He was still crouched at Zara's eye level, which meant that for the first time that evening, the most powerful person in the building was also the lowest person in the corridor, and Zara understood that this was not an accident. She had seen enough of how adults manage situations to know the difference between the crouch that was condescension, the false lowering that still looked down, and the crouch that was something else. This was something else. His eyes were steady, not kind in the easy way, not performing patience, just present. Behind him, Derek Holt had not moved, but he had shifted. It was the smallest possible shift, a weight redistribution, a slight angling of the body. But Zara had been watching people shift for 9 years, and she recognized it. It was the shift of a man who was calculating, who was assessing the distance between himself and the nearest version of control. She kept her eyes on Marcus Reeves. "Tell me what you saw," he said. "Take your time." She did not need much time. She had been organizing it in her head since 8:23. 6 weeks ago, she said, "I was at my mother's work, the staging kitchen on Archer Street, the one for the catering company she works for. I was doing homework at the folding table in the back office. There's a window that looks out on the alley." Reeves listened. A black car came into the alley. 2 men got out. One of them was him. She did not point. She had decided not to point because pointing made things theatrical, and this was not theatrical. This was a statement of fact. "The man behind you. The one with the silver at his temples." She heard Holt make a sound. Not a word. A preparation for a word. The particular intake of breath that preceded managed protest. "Marcus, I don't know what, Derek." Reeves said it without turning around. One word, flat and level, and it had the effect of closed door. The silence returned. "The other man," Zara continued, "had a red tie. He was shorter." They stood near the open trunk of the car, and one of them passed something to the other. Something flat, like a folder or an envelope. They didn't talk much. They were quick about it. Which direction were they facing? Reeves asked. "Away from the building," Zara said. The shorter man was standing, so his back was toward the window, like he knew it was there. Something moved in Reeves's face. Controlled, barely visible. She watched it anyway. "And tonight," he said, "tonight I was sitting in the service corridor, the door at the end that goes to the ground floor hallway. They walked past me." She paused. "I don't think they saw me because I wasn't moving and I had my book open, and most adults don't look at children who are sitting still with books." Reeves's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. Something more complex. "He said the transfers were already structured," Zara said. "He said by the time the quarterly audit closes, it would look like operational dispersal." And then he said, she stopped. She wanted to make sure she had this exactly right, because exactly right mattered. He said, "He won't look. He never looks. That's why this works." The corridor was very quiet. Marcus Reeves looked at her for a long moment. She had expected many possible responses. She had prepared, in the way she prepared for most things, for the most likely outcomes. The most likely outcome, she had calculated, was polite disbelief, the gentle, managed tone adults used when they wanted to dismiss something without appearing to dismiss it. The second most likely outcome was genuine disbelief, less managed and therefore more honest. The third was something she had hoped for but not counted on, What Marcus Reeves did was none of those things. He stood up, slowly. He straightened to his full height, and then he turned around, and for the first time since Zara had stepped into the corridor junction, he looked at Derek Holt. He looked at him the way you look at some you have run twice and arrived at the same answer both times. Not with surprise, not with the eruption of betrayal, with the particular stillness of a man who has just confirmed something he had been, in some part of himself, already calculating. "Derek," he said, "walk with me." "Marcus, this is a child in a service corridor who clearly walk with me." The words were not raised. They were not accompanied by anything additional. They were simply said in the voice of a man who had spent 30 years being the person whose word ended negotiations and who had just decided that this negotiation was over. Derek Holt looked at Zara. She looked back at him, and she did not look away, because looking away was not something she had been raised to do when she was certain of what she knew. Her grandmother had told her, "You look people in the eye when you're telling the truth, because the truth doesn't need the floor." She did not look away. Something happened in Derek Holt's face in that moment. A rapid sequence of small adjustments. The kind of recalculation that happens when a man who has always been the person who did the surprising suddenly finds himself surprised. It was not exactly fear. It was the precise awareness of a closed exit. Then he straightened, adjusted his jacket, and followed Marcus Reeves down the corridor. Camille found her 2 minutes later. She came around the corner from the kitchen wing with a second paper towel in her hand and the look of a woman who had been doing the specific math of where her daughter was and had arrived at an answer that required immediate verification. When she saw Zara standing alone in the corridor junction, she exhaled a breath that had been waiting for release since approximately the moment she'd last checked on her. "Why are you in this?" she stopped. She read her daughter's face the way she had always read it, with the particular fluency of a mother who had learned the language of this specific child over 9 years. "What happened?" "I told him," Zara said. "Told who what?" "Mr. Reeves, the man whose event this is. I told him about his advisor." Camille went very still. In the years since, when Zara thought about this moment, what she remembered was not the words but the quality of the stillness. The way her mother stood in a hotel service corridor in a black catering uniform with a paper towel in her hand, and looked at her daughter and did all the calculations that only a mother in that position could do. The calculations about jobs and safety and what happened when a black woman who cleaned up after rich people's parties told those rich people's stories back to them, and the calculations about her daughter and what it meant to have a child who saw everything clearly and said so. She did all of those calculations in approximately 5 seconds. "Zara," her voice was controlled. "What exactly did you say?" "I told him the truth about what I heard tonight and what I saw 6 weeks ago." She paused. "I told him before I told you because there wasn't time to find you first. And I thought," she stopped. She was not entirely sure how to finish this sentence. "What did you think?" "I thought if I waited I might lose my nerve," Zara said. "And I didn't want to lose my nerve." Camille looked at her daughter. Then she pulled her close in the quick, fierce way she held her sometimes. Not gently, not sweetly, but with the specific urgency of someone who understood that love and terror could occupy the same gesture, and she held her for exactly as long as she allowed herself before she stepped back and put both hands on Zara's shoulders and looked at her directly. "Are you all right?" "Yes." "Did anyone?" "Nobody touched me. Nobody raised their voice." Mr. Reeves listened to everything. Camille's hands tightened briefly on her daughter's shoulders. "And then what?" Then he walked Derek Holt down the corridor. "Derek," Camille stopped. "You know his name?" "I found out tonight." She paused. "His name was on the seating chart posted in the secondary prep room. I read it when I walked past." Her mother looked at her for a moment with an expression that contained, as it often did, several contradictory things: exasperation and pride and exhaustion, and something that was not quite wonder, but was related to it. "I need to finish service," Camille said. "I know. You stay where I can see you." "I will." "Zara." Camille's voice shifted. Softer. "You are the most." She stopped again. Started again. "We're going to talk about this in detail when we get home." "I know. And you're not in trouble." "I know that too." Camille looked at her once more, quickly, as though committing something to memory. Then she turned and went back to the kitchen. Zara returned to her crate. underscore underscore at 10:27. A hotel manager appeared in the service corridor with the particular expression of a person who had been given unexpected instructions and was navigating them carefully. "Are you Zara?" he said. "Yes. Mr. Reeves would like to speak with you. With your mother present." He paused. "If that's agreeable." She thought about the word agreeable, and about the fact that this man was asking rather than directing, which told her something about what Marcus Reeves had said to the hotel staff in the last 40 minutes. "My mother is finishing her service commitment." "We're aware," the manager said. "We can wait until she's done." Zara nodded once. At 10:51, Camille appeared at the service entrance, still in her uniform, her face composed in the way it was composed when she had decided to hold herself together regardless of what happened next. She stood beside Zara and took her daughter's hand without saying anything, and together they followed the hotel manager to the elevator bank. The elevator rose quietly to the 6th floor. The suite at the end of the 6th floor corridor was not flashy. It was a working suite, a table, chairs, a sideboard with water glasses on it, windows looking out over the city lights. 2 other people were in the room when they arrived. A woman Zara didn't recognize, sitting at the table with a laptop open, and a man in a different suit who had the posture of someone accustomed to being in rooms where important decisions were made without announcing himself. Marcus Reeves was standing near the window. He turned when they came in, and his face did the same thing it had done in the corridor when he had crouched to Zara's eye level. It organized itself into seriousness without theatrics, the face of a man who was treating this exactly as seriously as it warranted, which was very seriously indeed. "Mrs." he started. "Ms. Williams," Camille said. Her voice was level. "Camille Williams. This is my daughter Zara. Thank you for coming up." He looked at Camille steadily. "I want to be direct with you, Ms. Williams. I've had a conversation with my security team and my foundation's legal counsel in the last hour. What your daughter described tonight is consistent with financial irregularities that our internal audit flagged 3 months ago and that I was told were resolved. They were not resolved." Camille's hand tightened slightly around Zara's. "What your daughter saw 6 weeks ago in the alley, the man she identified as Derek Holt, and the individual she described, matches the profile of a transaction our security team had already been examining. They simply had no direct witness who had seen the transfer. Holt had been careful. He didn't know about me," Zara said. Reeves looked at her. "No," he said. "He didn't, because I was doing homework." She paused. People don't plan for homework. Something shifted in the room. The lawyer at the table made a small sound that was not quite a laugh, and then recovered. Camille made no sound at all, but her hand loosened fractionally. Reeves looked at Zara for a moment longer. Then he said, and this time the quietness in his voice was not the quietness of a public speaker reaching for resonance, but the quietness of a man who was speaking directly and without arrangement. "How much did you understand of what you heard tonight?" "Enough," Zara said. "Someone was moving money to places it wasn't supposed to go, and the reason it worked was because you trusted him and he used that." Reeves looked at her without speaking. "That's the part that made me feel like I had to say something," she continued. "Not just the money. The part where he said you wouldn't look. Because that's not actually about you not looking. That's about him knowing you trust him enough not to look. And he used your trust against you on purpose." The room was very quiet. The lawyer at the table had stopped typing. Marcus Reeves looked at a 9-year-old girl in an old coat with tight braids and a chapter book under her arm. And he looked at her the way people looked at things that said something true in a way they hadn't expected truth to arrive. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly what happened." Underscore, 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 underscore. If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Bound Hearts. The best ones are still coming, and the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. Underscore underscore. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Zara answered every question the lawyer asked her with the same precision she had answered Marcus Reeves in the corridor, going back to the beginning each time and working through the steps. She had been careful to say, I think, only when she was not certain, and I know, only when she was, because her grandmother had taught her that honesty was not just about telling the truth, but about being accurate about the edges of the truth, the places where you knew and the places where you were inferring. The lawyer, whose name was Patricia, asked her twice to repeat the exact words she had heard Derek Holt say in the service corridor. Zara repeated them both times without variation, because they had been stored precisely from the moment she heard them. Patricia looked at Marcus Reeves after the second repetition. Something passed between them, a look that had the quality of a conversation that had already been happening in a different register, one that Zara's account had just closed. Camille sat beside her daughter and said very little, but Zara felt her mother's attention like weather, present, surrounding, calibrated to every shift in the room. Once, when Patricia asked a question about the stage and kitchen and how long Zara had been there, Camille added, quietly and without drama, the exact address of the kitchen and the date of the catering event, information she had available because she was a woman who kept records of where she worked and when. Marcus Reeves watched Camille when she said this. He watched her the way he had watched Zara in the corridor, not with the distant, managed attention of a man observing a situation, but with the closer, quieter attention of a man who is understanding something about the conditions a person had been living inside. Ms. Williams, he said, when the formal part of the conversation was winding down, I want to ask you something that is not related to the legal matter. Camille looked at him steadily. All right. How long have you been with Prestige Events? 4 years. Before that, administrative work, accounts receivable, primarily, for a hospital system. She said it the way she said most things about her own history, without apology and without elaboration, the way a person presents facts that are simply facts. What happened there? The directness of the question landed in the room clearly. Camille looked at him for a moment, measuring. Budget cuts, she said. The position was eliminated. Reeves looked at her for a moment longer. Were you good at it? The corner of Camille's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. I was excellent at it. I believe you, he said. The room was quiet for a moment. My foundation's financial operations are going to require significant review and restructuring beginning immediately, he said. That process will need people with accounts receivable experience and the kind of attention to detail that he stopped. And something in his face was different now, the deliberate precision of a man who was choosing his next words with care. That apparently runs in families. Camille was very still. I'm not offering charity, he said, and the word landed the way it had been chosen, directly, acknowledging what she would need him to acknowledge. I'm identifying a need that my organization has in a person with the skills to address it. Those are two different things, and I'm aware they need to stay two different things. Camille looked at him for a long, measured moment. Then she said, I would need to know more about the role. Of course, he said, and I would need the conversation to happen separately from tonight. Well, I've had time to think clearly. Of course, he said again. Zara watched her mother's face. She watched the exact quality of dignity in it. The way Camille held herself not as someone receiving something, but as someone being accurately assessed, which was different and mattered. She stored that, too. Underscore 11:43. They came back down in the elevator. Camille held Zara's hand. The city lights moved past the elevator's small window as they descended, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Camille said, quietly, looking straight ahead, You could have told me first. I know, Zara said. I almost did. Why didn't you? Zara thought about this. She had been thinking about it all evening, actually. Because I was afraid that if I told you first, you would tell me to stay out of it, she said. And I understand why you would do that. You have a job here, and I know what that means. But I also, she stopped. She was trying to find the exact right words, which was what she always did, because approximate words were a form of dishonesty. I also thought, she said, that if I stayed out of it, and you found out later that I had known and said nothing, you would be more upset about that than about anything else. Camille said nothing. Because you always told me, Zara continued, that the thing you can never get back is the moment when you should have spoken and didn't. The elevator doors opened. They stood in the lobby of the Harrington Grand, which was mostly empty now, the gala having dispersed. The amber lighting had dimmed slightly, and the hotel had the particular quiet of late evenings, when the performance of the day had finished and the building had returned to its own. Camille looked down at her daughter. I don't know, she said carefully, whether to tell you that you were brave or whether to tell you that you took a risk that could have gone very differently. Both things can be true, Zara said. A small sound from Camille that was unmistakably a laugh, brief and genuine and quickly composed. Yes, she said, both things can be true. She held Zara's hand as they walked through the lobby toward the exit. The man at the front desk nodded at them as they passed, and Zara noticed that the nod was slightly different from the nod that lobby staff gave to catering workers at the end of an event, slightly more attentive, slightly less automatic. Something had moved tonight. She wasn't sure yet of the full shape of it. She knew that legal processes were slow and complicated, that the man in the charcoal suit was going to have resources she couldn't imagine, and that the distance between a 9-year-old girl's testimony and a formal legal outcome was not a short distance. She knew that her mother had questions to answer about a job offer that had arrived in the strangest possible circumstances, and that accepting it or declining it would each come with their own complications. She knew that nothing was finished. But she also knew this. Derek Holt had said Marcus Reeves would never look. And tonight, in a hotel corridor, because a girl had been sitting quietly enough and long enough and had stored the right things on the right shelves, Marcus Reeves had looked. And he had seen. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, the thing that everything else would come from. Underscore. Outside. The November air was sharp and clean. Camille adjusted Zara's coat collar without being asked, tugging it up against the cold with the particular efficiency of a mother who had been doing this for 9 years and had long since made a reflex. Zara let her. They walked to the bus stop. The bus came in 4 minutes. They sat together in the warm, humming quiet of a late-night city bus, Camille with her bag on her lap, and her head tipped slightly back against the window, her eyes not quite closed. Zara sat beside her with the chapter book open on her knees and did not read it. After a while, Camille said, without opening her eyes, she's right, you know? About what you said. About the trust. Zara waited. That's what makes it the worst kind of betrayal, Camille said quietly. Not just that he stole, but he studied the man well enough to know exactly which door to use. Zara thought about this. He studied the wrong thing, though. What do you mean? He studied what Marcus Reeves wouldn't look at, she said. He didn't study what Marcus Reeves was surrounded by. Camille opened her eyes and looked at her daughter. He didn't think about the people in the service corridor, Zara said. He didn't think about the catering staff or the people doing homework at the folding table. He planned for everything at the level he was used to operating at. She paused. He made the mistake of thinking that because we're invisible to him, we're invisible. The bus moved through the city. Camille looked at her daughter for a long moment. The full, undefended look she reserved for moments when she had decided to stop managing her response and simply feel it. You are something, she said softly. You always say that. I mean it every time. Zara looked out the window at the city moving past. Grandma is going to want to know all of this, she said. Grandma, Camille said, is going to be up waiting regardless. They rode in silence for a while after that. The kind of silence that held everything that had happened that evening without needing to arrange it into words yet. The city lights came and went in the window. The bus stopped and started. Other passengers boarded and exited. And in the warm interior of a late-night bus, a woman in a catering uniform and her 9-year-old daughter with tight braids and an old coat rode home together through a city that did not yet know what had happened inside one of its most expensive hotels, though it would learn soon enough. Grandma Dot was in fact up waiting. She was sitting in the armchair by the front window with a cup of tea that had gone cold and a devotional she had not been reading. And when the apartment door opened, she looked at Zara with the specific attention of a woman who had spent 71 years learning to read the room before the room finished introducing itself. "Sit down," she said, before either of them had taken off their coats. They sat. Grandma Dot listened to the whole account without interrupting, which was not her natural mode, but which she deployed on the occasions when she understood that interruption would cost more than it gave. She held her cold tea in both hands, and she watched Zara's face as Zara spoke, and when Zara finished, Grandma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, to no one in particular, "The Lord does not waste a sharp eye." Camille pressed her lips together. "And you," Grandma said, looking at Zara, "you told a billionaire that his advisor was stealing from him in a hotel corridor by yourself at 9 years old." "Yes, ma'am." "And he listened?" "Yes, ma'am." Grandma set down her tea. "Your grandfather," she said, in the voice she used when she was about to say something she had been carrying for a long time, used to say that the most powerful thing in any room was the person nobody was watching. She paused. He meant it as a warning. About the people who would use that to do harm. She looked at her granddaughter. "You used it the other way." Zara thought about this. "That's the choice," Grandma said. "Every time. That's always the choice." They stayed up until past midnight, the three of them at the kitchen table, the way they stayed up sometimes when something had happened that needed the full company of the people who loved each other. Camille made actual tea, hot this time, and they drank it and talked through the evening in pieces, and gradually the shape of what had happened assembled itself into something they could all hold. At 12:41, Grandma said it was time to sleep. Zara brushed her teeth and washed her face and laid down in her bed in the dark and looked at the ceiling. She thought about Marcus Reeves standing at the window of the hotel suite with the city behind him, looking the way he had looked in the lobby when she had first seen him, searching for something between himself and a question he hadn't answered yet. She hoped he had found something worth finding. She fell asleep before she finished deciding. The weeks that followed were not dramatic in the way stories sometimes required them to be. They were, instead, complicated in the specifically unglamorous way that reality was complicated, full of phone calls and waiting and careful conversations and the particular patience of processes that moved at the speed of institutions rather than the speed of feeling. Patricia, the lawyer, called Camille twice in the first week. A second attorney, one whose firm was independent of the Reeves Foundation, also called. Camille had insisted on this, and the insistence had been respected. Zara was asked to provide a formal written account of what she had witnessed and heard, which she did at the kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon with Camille beside her, working through each paragraph with the same methodical precision she brought to the rest of her thinking. Her teacher, Mrs. Okafor, noticed that Zara was distracted during math on Wednesday and asked if everything was all right. "Yes," Zara said. "I'm just thinking about something outside of school. Is it something you want to talk about?" "Not yet," Zara said. "But thank you." She meant to thank you. Mrs. Okafor nodded as though she understood, which she probably did, because she was one of the adults in Zara's life who had learned to read the difference between a child in distress and a child in thought. Derek Holt, Zara learned later, much later, through the specific channels by which these things eventually reached the people who needed to know, had retained legal representation within 48 hours of the gala. This was not surprising. What was slightly more surprising, though in retrospect perhaps it shouldn't have been, was that the legal team he retained was not able to fully contain the investigation that had already been in progress for 3 months, the one that her account had essentially closed. The quarterly audit that Holt had mentioned in the corridor, the one he had said would make the transfers look like operational dispersal, had not yet closed when Patricia's team moved. Timing, Zara thought when she understood this. He had planned for everything except the timing. She stored that on its own shelf, because it seemed important in a way that would probably become clearer later. Underscore. Underscore 6 weeks after the gala. On a Saturday afternoon that was cold and bright in the way of early winter days that hadn't decided yet whether to be beautiful or brutal, Camille and Zara took the bus to an address on the north side of the city that was not the Harrington Grand and was not a hotel at all, but a low brick building with a plain sign outside that read Reeves Foundation, Community and Education Center. Zara had not known this building existed. She looked at it through the bus window as they pulled up to the stop, taking it in the way she took in things that required updating her understanding of a situation. She had known about the foundation. She had known about the gala. She had not known about this building, which looked nothing like a gala, which looked, in fact, like a place where work happened rather than where work was celebrated. Inside, there was a reception desk staffed by a young woman who was on the phone and waved them toward chairs with the comfortable efficiency of someone who was doing 3 things at once and managing all of them. The chairs were not lobby chairs. They were the kind of chairs that had been used enough to say, "People work here, and the work is what matters." Marcus Reeves came out of a door to the left of the reception desk at exactly the time he said he would, which Zara noted because punctuality was a form of respect for other people's time, and she had been taught to notice it. He was not wearing a gala suit. He was wearing the kind of clothes a person wore when they were at a place they worked rather than performed, and he looked, in this context, more like the person she had intuited him to be in the lobby of the Harrington Grand than the person the evening had required him to be. "Ms. Williams," he said to Camille. "Zara." He said her name the way adults said it when they meant to say it, rather than just proceeding to the business at hand. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for the invitation," Camille said. They went into a conference room that had a whiteboard on one wall and a window overlooking a small courtyard, where 2 people were moving chairs around in a way that suggested setup for something. Zara watched them for a moment and then looked back at the room. There were other people in the conference room. Patricia, the lawyer. A woman named Sandra, who was introduced as the Foundation's interim chief operations officer. A man named George, who handled community program development. And across the table, with a notepad in front of her and a pen behind her ear, a woman Zara didn't recognize who was introduced as the Foundation's new director of financial oversight and who had, according to the brief introduction Marcus Reeves gave, been brought in specifically to rebuild the financial audit systems that the previous arrangement had compromised. Camille shook hands around the table without performing her composure, which Zara admired. The conversation that followed was formal in structure and honest in tone, which was a combination Zara respected most. Marcus Reeves explained, without euphemism, that the investigation into the financial irregularities Derek Holt had constructed over a period of approximately 14 months was ongoing and would have consequences that were being handled through the appropriate legal channels. He did not use Derek Holt's name after the first mention of it. He did not need to. He also explained, carefully and in a way that left space for questions, that the Foundation was restructuring its administrative operations and that one of the positions being created in the restructuring was a senior accounts reconciliation role in the Foundation's Community Grants Division. He looked at Camille when he said this. Camille looked at the job description that Sandra slid across the table. Zara watched her mother read. She watched the specific quality of Camille's attention, the way her eyes moved down the page and the methodical way they moved when she was reading something she was evaluating rather than something she was merely consuming. She watched her mother's face for the tell, the small involuntary signal that appeared when Camille encountered something she recognized, something she knew how to do, something that had been part of who she was before the budget cuts and the laundromat and the account that had come up short on the 15th of the month more times than Zara had ever been meant to know about, but did know about because she was the kind of child who noticed the math. The tell appeared about a third of the way down the page. A slight change in the stillness of Camille's expression, a settling. "This is accounts receivable and reconciliation work," Camille said. "Primarily, yes," Sanders said. with some grant compliance work in addition. We need someone who understands how money is supposed to move and can identify when it's not moving the way it should. Camille looked at the page for another moment. "I want to discuss the specifics of the hours," she said, "and whether there's flexibility for school pickup." "We can discuss that," Sandra said without hesitation. "And I wanted to be clear," Camille said, looking up from the page, "that I'm applying for this role because I'm qualified for this role, not because of what my daughter did." The room was quiet for a moment. Marcus Reeves said, "Those two things are not incompatible." Camille looked at him. "What your daughter did was notice something," he said. "What you raised was a child who notices things and tells the truth about them. Those are not separate from your qualifications. They're evidence of your judgment." He paused. "I'm hiring your judgment, Ms. Williams. The rest of it, the circumstances that brought this to my attention, those are separate." Camille held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked back at the job description and said, "I'd like to ask a few more questions about the grant's compliance component." Zara exhaled very quietly and looked at the courtyard window, where the people outside had finished moving the chairs and were now setting up what looked like a small outdoor reading corner. Low benches, a bookshelf with a rain covering, a painted mural on the brick wall behind it. The formal conversation took an hour and 15 minutes. Afterward, while Camille and Sandra were still at the table going through the specifics, Marcus Reeves walked to the window and stood beside Zara, looking out at the courtyard. "What is that?" she asked, nodding toward the reading corner. "We're building a community reading program," he said, "for the neighborhood. Kids from the schools nearby can come after hours." "Whose idea was that?" "One of our youth outreach coordinators. She grew up 2 blocks from here." He paused. "She said what this neighborhood needed was not a better after-school program. She said what it needed was a place that said, 'You belong here, and the things you think and the things you notice and the things you imagine belong here too.'" Zara looked at the mural. It was colorful and specific and had clearly been painted by someone who knew the block. "That's a good idea," she said. "I thought so." They were quiet for a moment. "Mr. Reeves," she said. "Yes." "When did you actually start to think something was wrong?" "Before the gala, I mean." He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who didn't know the answer, but the quiet of someone deciding how honest to be with a 9-year-old about the specific quality of his own failure. "About 8 months ago," he said. "There were numbers in the quarterly reports that had a shape I didn't recognize. Not wrong exactly, just shaped differently than I expected." He paused. "I asked Derek about them." "What did he say?" "He had an answer." Another pause. "He always had an answer. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. He was never uncertain. He never needed time to think. He had everything ready." He looked at the courtyard. "I've learned, since, that the answers that arrive too quickly are the ones worth looking at more carefully." Zara thought about this. "He said you wouldn't look." "I heard you say that," he said. "In the corridor. Does it bother you that he was right?" The question landed in the space between them, and Reeves looked at her with the particular expression of someone being asked to be honest about a thing they had been working to be honest about with themselves. "Yes," he said. "It bothers me considerably." "I don't think it means you're not a careful person," Zara said. "I think it means he studied how to use the things about you that were good. He used your trust against you. That's not a failure of yours. That's a failure of his." She paused. "My grandma says you can't protect yourself from every form of wrong in the world, but you can make sure that when wrong gets close to you, you have people around who will say something." He was quiet for a long moment. "Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable person." "She is," Zara said. "She also says that remarkable is not the same as easy to live with, and that the two things often go together." Reeves made the small sound that Zara had come to recognize as his version of a genuine laugh. Brief, unperformed, arriving before he decided to allow it. "That is also true of most remarkable people I've known," he said. Underscore the walk back to the bus stop was colder than the walk from it, the afternoon having made its decision about being brutal rather than beautiful. Camille tucked Zara's collar up again at the corner, automatic and unsentimental, and they walked with their hands in their pockets. "You're going to take the job," Zara said. It was not really a question. "I'm going to interview for the job," Camille said. "Formally. Through the proper process." "You already interviewed." "That was a conversation. You brought all your answers." Camille looked down at her daughter. "You know, most children your age are worried about very different things." "I know," Zara said. "I'm also worried about whether they're going to cancel the spring readathon at school, if that helps." Camille laughed, a full one this time, the kind that changed her whole face, the kind Zara worked to produce because it was one of the best things in her world. "It does help, actually." The bus came. They rode south through the city as the afternoon light went golden and then gray, the particular sequence of a winter day ending, the streets filling with people heading home from the places their Saturdays had taken them. Zara thought, as she sometimes thought on bus rides, about the shape of things, about how a morning that had begun on a milk crate with a peanut butter sandwich had become, over the course of 6 weeks, something she could not yet fully see the end of, a legal process still unfolding, a job her mother was going to interview for properly, and would get because she was excellent, and had always been excellent, and the world had simply failed to arrange itself around that fact until now. She thought about Derek Holt, somewhere in a process that would take its course at the speed of institutions. She did not feel triumphant about this. She had thought she might when she imagined getting to this point, but what she actually felt was quieter and more complicated, something closer to the feeling of finishing a math problem and checking the answer and finding that it was correct. Not excitement, just the satisfaction of the right answer being the right answer. She thought about Marcus Reeves at the window of a low brick building, looking at a reading corner in a courtyard, talking to her like she was a person rather than a circumstance. She thought about her mother's face when she was reading the job description, the tell, the settling, the moment of recognition. She thought about what her grandmother had said at the kitchen table. That's always the choice. She looked out the window at the city. 3 months later, on the last Thursday of February, Camille Williams started her new position at the Reeves Foundation Community Grants Division. She wore the blue blouse she had bought at the end-of-season sale and the black trousers she had pressed the night before, and she left the apartment at 8:15 with her lunch packed and her transit card ready and her shoulders at the particular angle they took when she was doing something she had decided to do completely. Zara was at school. She had wished her mother good luck at breakfast with the seriousness she brought to things she actually meant. "You don't need luck," she had added, "but I hope the morning is easy." Camille had looked at her for a moment, the full, undefended look, and said, "Me too, baby." The morning was not particularly easy. First days rarely were, regardless of how qualified the person was, but it was right. That was the word Camille used when she called Grandma Dot at lunch. Not good, not great. Right? Like a key in the correct lock. Grandma said, "Well, it's about time." Understood. Zara heard about the formal conclusion of the investigation on a Tuesday in March, which was also the day of the spring readathon at school, which had not been canceled. She heard about it not from a lawyer or a news report, but from her mother, who came home from work that evening and sat down at the kitchen table and told her in plain, direct language what had been concluded, because Camille Williams had raised a child who was owed the truth in plain, direct language. Derek Holt had been formally charged with financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and several related counts. The individual described as the shorter man with the red tie, whose name Zara now knew was a man called Philip Marsh, a financial intermediary with whom Holt had been working for a period of approximately 2 years, had also been charged. Both had legal representation, and the process would continue for some time, as these processes did. Zara listened to all of this. Then she said, "Was the evidence enough?" "Yes," Camille said. "The documentation was there. It had always been there. It just needed someone to look at the right places. And what I said, what you said," Camille told her, "gave them the places to look." Zara nodded. She went to her room and took out her homework and did it methodically, starting with the hardest subject and working toward the easiest, the way she always did. When she was done, she sat for a moment at her desk and looked out the window at the street below, where the March evening was still light enough to see the people moving on the sidewalk. She thought about a hotel corridor and a man crouching to be at her eye level and a simple question, "What's your name?" She thought about what it meant that he had asked for her name before he asked for her account, that he had understood, before anything else, that the person in front of him had a name and that the name came first. She thought about her grandmother's phrase, "The most powerful thing in any room is the person nobody is watching." And then she thought, that was true, but it was only half of the thing. The other half was this: the person nobody is watching can choose what to do with that. They can let the invisibility protect them, keep their head down and their mouth closed, and let the world arrange itself the way it had always arranged itself, around the people who expected to be seen. Or they can use what they have seen and say what they know, and take the risk of being seen for the first time in circumstances that nobody, not them, not the adults they're trying to reach, has planned for. She had chosen the second thing, in a hotel corridor on a Saturday night, in an old coat, with her mother's catering shift not yet finished and her chapter book under her arm. And it had mattered, not in the way of fairy tales, clean and finished and fully resolved in a single evening, but in the way that real things mattered, which was slowly and with complications, and through a chain of consequences that had taken months to play out and would probably keep playing out in ways she could not yet see. Her mother had a job that used her correctly. A man who had been used by someone he trusted had begun, carefully and without fanfare, the work of rebuilding his trust on better foundations. And in a community center on the north side of the city, a reading corner in a courtyard was open on weekday afternoon for the children of a neighborhood that had been told, in the specific language of brick and paint and low benches and books, "You belong here, and what you think belongs here too." These things were connected. She had not caused all of them. Most of them had been possible before she spoke. But she had been the reason they became actual rather than possible. The reason the door that had been there all along was finally opened. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. Underscore. In June, on the last Friday before summer, Zara came home from school to find a small package on the kitchen table with her name on it in handwriting she didn't recognize. She looked at it for a moment. She looked at her grandmother, who was making tea and not making eye contact in the particular way of someone who knew more than they were saying. She opened it. Inside was a box of crayons. The large kind, 64 colors, the kind she had once described to no one in particular, in the back office of a staging kitchen in Archer Street, as having every shade she could think of and then several she couldn't have imagined on her own. Under the crayons was a card. The handwriting on the card was the same as on the package. For a girl who noticed what nobody else did, and who said something when it mattered. "Thank you for reminding me that the most important people in any room are often the ones the room forgets to account for. MRPS. Your mother tells me you read faster than anyone at your school. There's a small library at the community center on the north side. You are welcome there anytime, with or without your chapter book." Zara held the card for a moment. Then she set it down carefully on the kitchen table, next to the box of 64 crayons, and she looked at it the way she looked at most things, steadily, quietly, without rushing toward a response before she had finished understanding it. Her grandmother set down a cup of tea beside her. "Well," Grandma said, in the voice she used when things had turned out the way they were supposed to. Not easily, not without cost, but correctly. "Well," Zara picked up the box of crayons. She turned it over in her hands once, feeling the weight of it, the particular, satisfying weight of a thing that was exactly what it was supposed to be. Then she went to find a piece of paper. Underscore. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another child the world underestimated. And we tell those stories here.